A young Jewish man pretends to be a pure-blooded German to survive during World War II. But one day, someone sees him without his pants, and that's when the real trouble begins. A new baby is born into a large Jewish family, and during a special ceremony, he undergoes circumcision. The boy's name is Solomon Perel. In 1938, a widespread persecution of Jews begins in Germany. Solomon is taking a bath, getting ready for his bar mitzvah, the traditional Jewish coming-of-age ceremony, which takes place at the age of 13. At that very moment, their home is surrounded by German stormtroopers who smash all the windows. Terrified, Solomon jumps naked into the street and hides in an empty barrel. This act saves his life because it happens to be the start of the Night of Broken Glass, a massive attack on Jews living in Austria and Germany. Later that night, Solomon peeks out of his barrel and asks a young German woman to bring him some clothes. She finds him a uniform from a member of the SS stormtroopers. Still dressed like that, Solomon returns home and learns that his sister Bertha was killed during the pogroms. His father decides to move the family to Poland, hoping they'll be safer there. They pretend to be Polish and hide their true identity. In Poland, Solomon befriends the cashier at a local movie theater and gets an opportunity to watch all the movies for free. He dreams of becoming an actor, but his dreams are not meant to come true, as Adolf Hitler comes to power in Germany and begins World War II. As you may remember, Germany first invaded Poland. Solomon witnesses the first air raids. He and his older brother Isaac are terrified. One of their family members, David, decides to join the Polish army, but he isn't even issued a rifle and ends up deserting his unit. David is convinced that the Germans will soon conquer Poland. Solomon's family decides to send their sons to Eastern Europe. They quickly pack their bags and set off. At Poland's eastern border, they find themselves in a crowd of people. In the chaos, Isaac and Solomon lose each other. The main character learns that the Soviet Union has attacked Poland from the other side. It turns out that Germany and the USSR had signed a secret pact to divide Polish territory between them. The Poles head back to the German-occupied part of Poland, while the Jews move to the Soviets. Solomon sits by the river all day, waiting for his brother, but Isaac never shows up. Eventually, the main character is taken to a Soviet orphanage in Grodno. There, they try to turn Solomon into a loyal Soviet patriot and communist. He's even accepted into the Komsomol youth organization. The boy receives letters from his family and learns that they've been forced into a ghetto. At night, Solomon climbs the window grates to secretly watch his young teacher, Inna. He receives a communist education and studies Russian. In one lesson, he declares that God doesn't exist and calls religion the opium of the people, hoping to hide his Jewish identity. Another orphan, a Polish boy named Zenek, objects and shouts that God does exist. A scandal breaks out. Inna tells Zenek to pray and ask God to drop candy from the sky. Of course, after his prayer, nothing happens. But if you ask Comrade Stalin for candies, miraculously, they do fall from the ceiling. Or rather, someone drops them from above. At that moment, an air raid begins. Germany has betrayed the USSR and invaded the Soviet-occupied part of Poland. The children scatter in panic. People leave their homes and walk along the road. Inna seizes a truck from a driver and loads all the children from the orphanage into it. A German plane appears in the sky and drops bombs. Solomon hides, and the truck drives off without him. He tries to catch up with his companions, but he fails. Soon, Solomon is captured by German soldiers. They search the boy and take him to a prisoner camp. When the Germans begin selecting Jews and Soviet commissars to be executed, Solomon hides his documents and lies to the soldiers, claiming that he is Joseph Peters, an ethnic German from Grodno. He says the Soviets attacked his family, kidnapped him, and sent him to an orphanage. The soldiers take Solomon to their commander. The boy admits that he speaks both German and Russian fluently, and the Germans decide to use him as an interpreter. Solomon helps the soldiers identify one of the prisoners as Yakov Jugashvili, the son of Joseph Stalin. At that point, the Germans are fully convinced that Solomon is one of them. They no longer ask for his documents and take him into their service. At the German camp, Solomon is recognized by Zenek, who tells the soldiers his real name and shouts that he's a Jew. The main character lies, claiming not to know the boy, walks up to Zenek and punches him in the face. The young Pole tries to run, but ends up being hit by a German truck. Solomon loses consciousness and has disturbing hallucinations about Stalin and Hitler. He is now part of the German army. Solomon has to run deep into the forest to relieve himself. Otherwise, the Germans might see that he is circumcised and realize he's a Jew. Solomon is summoned by his commander, Herr Hauptmann. The German officer declares that their main enemies aren't the communists, but the Jews. Hearing this terrifies Solomon. The guy is shown the executed Soviet partisans, and in despair, he grabs a machine gun. Solomon admits that he's completely confused. He's lost all sense of who's an ally and who's an enemy. A German soldier named Robert starts showing an interest in the protagonist. The thing is, Robert is very fond of young boys. Solomon draws a small bath to wash himself and carefully locks all the shutters. However, Robert finds him and discovers his terrible secret. Solomon begs the German not to tell anyone, or he'll be executed on the spot. Robert likes the boy a lot, so he decides to show him mercy. From that point on, they become very close friends, maybe even more than friends. But the film doesn't show us any more than that. Another battle with Soviet soldiers begins. At first, the Germans are winning and even intercept their enemies' radio communications. But soon, they get under heavy shelling. Robert and the other German soldiers are killed. Solomon is the only one who survives. He lies next to the body of his only friend, not knowing what to do next. Solomon uses the radio to contact Soviet troops, telling them he is a Jew who was taken prisoner by the Germans, and decides to head toward the Soviet army. They advise him to cross the bridge at night and make his way to the Soviet camp. However, as he does so, German soldiers chase after him, and the Soviet troops surrender. Instead of being treated as a deserter, Solomon is welcomed as a true hero. The company commander, Herr Hauptmann, decides to adopt Solomon and give him a proper education so that he can become a true Nazi. Since the boy has no choice but to obey his superior, he is sent to an elite Hitler Youth Academy in Germany. At the academy, Solomon is introduced as an ethnic German, a true Aryan, and a war hero named Joseph Peters. He swears an oath to Hitler and joins the other students. He is assigned to share a room with a German boy named Gerd. Solomon realizes that he must play his role perfectly if he wants to survive. The bathrooms and shower stalls pose a particular danger. During lunch, Solomon meets a girl named Lenny, who serves food at the academy. The students not only study, but also undergo constant training. For example, they swim in the pool in full uniform, carrying rifles. Solomon notices that Lenny has fallen in love with him, and he returns her affection. In one class, the students are taught how to identify Jews. According to the professor, Jews have certain physical traits, such as high foreheads, protruding ears, and a cunning look. Aryans, in contrast, are much more attractive. They have light hair, blue eyes, and perfect bodies. Solomon is called to the front of the class. The professor measures the proportions of his face and concludes that he is an example of the East Baltic race. Not a perfect Aryan, but definitely not a Jew. The students find out that the German army has been defeated at Stalingrad. Solomon pretends to be deeply upset by the news. He begins a romantic relationship with Lenny. Unfortunately, the guy can't take their relationship to its natural conclusion because he's afraid of being exposed. Solomon decides to use a needle and thread to conceal his circumcision. It's extremely painful and dangerous, but he longs for love. Solomon visits Lenny at her home and meets her mother. During dinner, the guy admits he doesn't know where his parents are and even breaks down in tears. Soon, a routine medical examination is scheduled at the academy. Everyone is required to undress completely. Solomon lies and says he has a terrible toothache, so he is sent to the dentist. There they pull out one of his perfectly healthy teeth. At night, Solomon wakes up in excruciating pain. It seems that his needle and thread experiment caused an infection, and now he's suffering terribly. He has to remove the stitches himself. Sadly, there's no chance of being intimate with Lenny anymore. The girl doesn't understand what's going on or why her boyfriend is so shy. Solomon lies that she's too young for him. One day, they stumble upon a Jewish cemetery and witness German soldiers destroying it. Lenny confesses that she hates Jews, and Solomon slaps her across the face. That night, the protagonist has another nightmare. He sees all his family sitting at the table, even Berta, but no one notices him. He hides in a storeroom with Hitler and remembers the address of the ghetto from which his father once sent him letters. Solomon is granted a short leave. He travels to the Polish city of Łódź to search for his family. However, he is not allowed into the ghetto. Instead, he's permitted to take a tram ride past it. Looking out the window, he sees the suffering of the starved and tormented prisoners and the brutal treatment they endure at the hands of German soldiers. He tries to spot his relatives among them, but doesn't see anyone he recognizes. Solomon returns to the academy and resumes his studies. He visits Lenny's mother and learns that his girlfriend is pregnant by his roommate, Gerd. Lenny plans to give her baby to the Lebensborn Association, where the child will be raised as a true Aryan. Upon hearing this, Solomon confesses that he couldn't spend the night with Lenny because he is Jewish. The woman promises to keep his secret, saying she doesn't support the Nazis either. Back at the dormitory, Solomon attacks Gerd in a fit of rage. Soon after, the protagonist is summoned for an interrogation by the Gestapo. They demand that he present a certificate of racial purity. Solomon lies, claiming the document is in Grodno. A Gestapo officer sends a letter there with an urgent request to find it. As Solomon steps outside, an air raid siren blares. Soviet planes appear in the sky and begin bombing the city. Once again, Solomon manages to survive, unlike his roommate Gerd. Soon, Soviet forces approach Berlin. The academy's students are sent to the front lines. Solomon deserts his unit and surrenders to the Soviet army. The Soviet soldiers doubt that he is Jewish and accuse him of treason. They tell him about the Nazi death camps and prepare to execute him for betraying the motherland. A group of prisoners who were just liberated from one of those camps walks nearby. One of them recognizes Solomon. It's his own brother, Isaac. The two embrace, laughing and crying. Isaac tells Solomon that their parents are long gone. They didn't survive one of the ghetto purges. Shortly after, the protagonist immigrates to Palestine. At the end of the film, we see the real Solomon Perel. Yes, he is a real person, and now we know the story of his extraordinary life.